Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
The Supreme Court limits the power of judges to check the president. Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power as the High Court rules along ideological lines today on President Trump's request to call off the legal dogs. SCOTUS left the fight over birthright citizenship for another day. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, this, of course, one of several rulings that we've got today, and the president just held forth for almost a full hour in the White House briefing room to take a victory lap on this.
Yeah, celebrating this is a big win for the administration, not just because it pertains to the birthright citizenship issue, but also because they see this as unlocking an easier path to pursuing their agenda without as much interference in the courts, at least on a national level. The president actually outlining a series of other priorities beyond birthright citizenship, like ending funding for sanctuary cities. For example, he was, of course, joined by the Attorney General Pam Bondi, who was quite passionate on this issue as well. It was lengthy, as you say, Joe. A lot of ground was covered, and Kendall was listening to the whole thing for us. So let's go to her right away live from the North Lawn of the White House. So Tyler, obviously, in part, this is about birthright citizenship, but it extends well beyond it.
Right, exactly, Kailey. And we should say that the ruling that the Supreme Court gave wasn't actually about the legality of the executive order from this White House when it comes to limiting birthright citizenship. This really was about the ability for judges to implement what's known as a universal injunction that would essentially curb how this executive order is put into place nationwide. Now, the court did rule that they found that how this has been handled likely exceeds the equitable authority that Congress has granted to federal courts. So that means that this administration now has a little bit more leeway here when it comes to their executive orders, and that there cannot be this curb from federal judges when it comes to these nationwide injunctions. We should also say that a lot of ground was covered in this meeting, and one I will point out to is trade. President Trump did say that that July 9th deadline for deals doesn't necessarily mean that's a firm deadline. He said it could be extended. He also mulled the idea that it could be shortened. And he said that in his view, he would like to get these long-awaited letters that we've been waiting for out in the next week and a half to our trading partners that would set a rate on the table that they could either take or leave. We're going to have to see if that really ends up happening, considering that we have heard from other administration officials before, including the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who today said that they are expecting all of the trade deals to be wrapped up by Labor Day. Quickly, I will leave you with one other point from this, which is another deadline. It's the July 4th deadline. We can't talk about tariffs without also talking about taxes. President Trump said July 4th was an important date, but it's not the end all for getting his reconciliation package over the finish line.
So maybe that timeline is indeed sliding. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live at the White House on a very busy day, Tyler. Indeed, much was talked about in that news briefing, but we want to stick with the ruling from the Supreme Court today, specifically on judges' power to issue nationwide injunctions. We're joined right now live from Capitol Hill by the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Of course, that is Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. And Senator, it's great to have you back with us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome to our conversation. I know that you are not happy about this ruling. Tell us what it means for the separation of powers in the United States.
What it means basically is the Supreme Court has created a procedural mess over one of the most explicit rights conferred by the Constitution, the right for a baby born in this country to be presumed to be an American citizen except under extraordinary cases. So now what this court has done in its infinite wisdom is to raise that question state by state, issue by issue. We should have had a national injunction. That's where we were headed, and it made sense on something this basic. But now the question's going to rise in state after state. Is my baby a citizen in Kansas? Is my baby a citizen in Illinois? That mess has been left by the Supreme Court, which I think will be almost impossible to unscramble.
So, Senator, even though the court did not explicitly decide on the birthright citizenship question in this ruling, you still see it as effectively having the same impact?
It's going to create chaos and confusion, but that has been a hallmark of the Trump administration for the last 6 months. He's issued so many executive orders trying to flood the zone, as he said, to overwhelm our legal system, and today he overwhelmed the Supreme Court in a majority decision, which I think is going to be leading to more and more chaos.
Well, the president just held a news briefing at the White House, Senator, just before you joined us. He thanked the court for solving what he called the injunction problem. You wrote in a statement a short time ago that by issuing this ruling, the court is stating that courts cannot block even the most lawless actions of the Trump administration on a nationwide basis. Does that leave Congress then as the only check on the executive?
God forbid that's all that's left. The Congress, particularly the Republican majorities in the House and Senate, are willing to give away all of their authority and rights under the Constitution. The president has beaten them down, and they are cowered by him. And unfortunately, that's going to lead to more and more chaos and confusion from this administration.
Senator, can you see ways around this nationwide injunction issue? For example, widening the pool of plaintiffs bringing cases. Would class action lawsuits be a way to effectively have the same impact as a nationwide injunction rather than bringing one individual plaintiff in one individual state? Or does this really effectively leave the gates open for the administration to pursue whatever policy they want nationally, knowing it cannot, there's no way for it to be withheld on a national level?
It's a mistake to believe that a class action is just simply a procedural motion that is easily achieved. There are standards that have to be met, and when you're going to apply it to state after state, what about the states that are not in the class? It really is going to mean a divergence of rights under the Constitution, state by state, and you'd think the Supreme Court justices, with all of their knowledge, some of them law school professors, would have stopped and said, let's try to apply common sense to this first. Let's have one standard across America. Let's decide whether that standard is right or wrong. But instead, they left a helter-skelter response to this lawsuit, which is going to create a lot of confusion.
Helter-skelter, says Dick Durbin. I'm not a lawyer, Senator, and I don't think I ever could have been. If I understand this correctly, based on what we're talking about here, if there's no possible nationwide injunction, can't the Supreme Court then be facing thousands of cases? Do they have to stay in session all year?
Well, I don't know about sticking around in session. They like to take their vacations too, and they're entitled to them. But they led this to a situation where you could have 20 or 21 states join in an action before the Supreme Court, and then serious questions as to whether the remaining states are even affected by the court decision. That really attacks the most fundamental questions of democracy and having a unified nation.
Well, and when we consider the layout of our democracy and the disparate branches of government, of which obviously the judicial is one, Senator, putting this case together, this nationwide injunction issue together with previous rulings we've seen from this Supreme Court, including the one around presidential immunity for official acts taken in office, in aggregate, what have they done to the office of the executive? How much more power has it been given?
Dramatic increases. The courts have given more power to the presidency, and as I mentioned earlier, the Republican majorities in the House and Senate are loath to ever question Donald Trump's demands for more and more authority under the Constitution. They are giving away rights right and left, and I think that is something that is a departure, a clear break from where we are in history. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt was reelected and was sick and tired of losing in the Supreme Court, he suggested adding justices to that court. The Democratic majority in the Congress, along with the Republicans, said not only no, but hell no. We're not going to let you do this to the court. They understood the institution of Congress has a responsibility under the Constitution, and they worked together on a bipartisan basis to protect it. These Republican leaders in the House and Senate today are cowered by this president. They're afraid to step back and say the obvious. The Constitution gives us authorities the president doesn't have.
Well, Senator, I know that some of your colleagues are a little bit afraid of the idea of the president giving them a phone call this weekend about his so-called big, beautiful bill. We'd love to ask your thoughts on the reconciliation process, knowing that this timeline appears to be sliding, and the president said just now in his briefing at the White House that he's not wedded to this July 4th deadline, whether it's Medicaid, whatever else the parliamentarian kicks out of the bill, lack of a deal on SALT. What's going to happen here? Are you planning to work this weekend, or did this just move into July?
Well, I've reported for duty. I'd rather be home, I can tell you that. but I have a job to do out here. I've been waiting patiently for the Republicans to present legislation. They can't come up with a formula that is going to give enough money for more tax breaks for the wealthy without cutting some fundamental things like health insurance for 16 million families, raising the cost of health insurance for many others, and cutting into Medicare programs, which are supposed to be sacred. And because they've had these problems, they've been twisting and trying to find some alternative the parliamentarian will accept. Without success at that level, we continue to wait and wait. But the fundamentals of this proposal are just plain wrong. $346,000 tax break for Elon Musk. For goodness sakes, will he even notice it? I mean, that kind of thing at the expense of downstate hospitals in Kansas and Missouri and Iowa and Illinois, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, Senator, what do you and your colleagues in the minority have within your power to slow down this process to any extent? Will there be lots of amendments, procedural hurdles thrown up, knowing that because this is reconciliation, party line is the expectation here?
We're going to give to the Republicans express specific choices by amendments so the American people can see how they'll vote. You know, just basic amendments as to whether or not you really want to cut the benefits under Medicare, whether or not you want to deny assistance to, as I said, downstate hospitals, rural hospitals, inner city hospitals, close them down and make it difficult for people to find quality health care. You know, those are going to be amendments offered by the Democrats because that's part of the package of tax breaks for wealthy people.
Are you hearing from any of your Republican colleagues who have conversations in your office, maybe when we're not around, Senator Durbin, about their feelings on this? There are a number I could name, including Tom Tillis, of course, Rand Paul, and others who are very concerned about different elements of this bill. And at the moment, we keep hearing that John Thune does not have the votes to pass it. Could there be a coalition of Democrats like yourself and some nervous Republicans who sink this bill?
It takes 4 senators, 4 Republican senators to step up and say, this is a bad idea and we can't make it any better. We got to step aside and go back to the regular bipartisan process. We'll have to give up some things that are important to us, but we're going to serve the American people with the appropriations that are necessary to keep our government functioning. Unfortunately, this reconciliation approach has taken a long time and they've been unable to resolve it.
All right, Senator, we appreciate you joining us live from Capitol Hill. Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, of course, the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We very much appreciate your time, sir. And as we consider the path forward for reconciliation, whether a working weekend will be enough to get this done or if this July 4th deadline is going to be not so much of the deadline we thought it was. We turn to our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us. Rick Davis, of course, Stonecourt Capital partner and Republican strategist. Jeanne, Democratic analyst and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick, we heard the president himself say today that this July 4th deadline is not the end all. Is that an admission that this process is not going to wrap up on the exact timeline Republicans hoped it would?
Yeah, I think that he made a calculated decision not to insist on this July 4th date and left it open for Thune and the leadership in the House Republican caucus to have some flexibility to get a deal done. Look, I mean, we know after the parliamentarian ruled some of these provisions, especially related to the cuts in Medicare, we're going to take some time to figure out how do you replace almost $300 billion in revenue that you were looking to be able to use to pay for this massive bill, wasn't going to be around. And so I know that they've been furiously cutting deals and taking things out of the bill that, may not pass muster with the parliamentarians. So the reality is, they will likely get a deal. I mean, I think everybody in the caucus believes that they will ultimately pass a piece of legislation to be called the Big Beautiful Bill. But it looks like probably more in before the August recess rather than the July recess.
Does that mean they get this done still with the debt ceiling component intact here, Jeanne, or could this slide far enough? They need Democrats. Republicans need Democrats to hash out a separate bill on dealing with avoiding a default.
Yeah, I don't think we know yet. I think they are still hopeful they will get this done before the end of July, which is what we hear is the X date. But, they may need Democrats to come along, and they're going to have to give something up for that. But, I read the president today during that press conference, and I loved how Dick Durbin told you guys he was reporting for duty. So I read the president to say that, he is acknowledging that this is probably going to slide past this July 4th deadline. If for no other reason, then these representatives and senators have got to get back to their districts and their states. They've got to be selling this bill. So far, at least by my calculation, the only one who's selling it is Donald Trump. And you can hear his message. If you don't do this, you are going to be raising taxes on Americans. But you don't hear that as much in as concerted a tone from the Republicans in the House and Senate, because they are all over many aspects of this bill that they don't like. So they need to be selling this bill. They need to get back to Washington and vote on it and get it over the finish line, because this is Donald Trump's agenda. It is the only train leaving the station. And if they let it go down, that would be an enormous loss, not just for Donald Trump, but for Republicans. I can't imagine that happening. And I also can't imagine anyone allowing the United States to allow the debt ceiling not to be lifted or to be removed as it should be. But, we don't know for certain when that's going to be. But I think Democrats would have to get along with them on the debt ceiling if they don't meet this deadline of July 4th.
Well, Rick, as Jeanne says, members need to go home and tell their constituents, hey, you should love this piece of legislation. What if actually they go home and what they hear from their constituents is, no, we hate this legislation? As polling has suggested, it's not popular. Is there a risk that members actually come back if they're allowed to go home and say, actually, no, we're more firmly standing our ground against the components of this package that we don't agree with?
Yeah, it's interesting that the president addressed this directly and talked about how people love this bill and how popular it is, and that's the reason to vote for it. I think one of the reasons there was so much pressure to try and get this bill done by July 4th is because you didn't want to go home and during this long period during the 4th of July and the August recess be exposed to all these constituents who are going to be showing up complaining about the cuts, complaining about, the different provisions in this bill that negatively affect them. And we've already seen pretty dicey town halls with members of Congress getting attacked. So much of this is a lead up to the midterm elections. And the further it's behind in the rearview mirror, the better chance Republicans have of sort of moving beyond it. And so, yeah, I think that they're going to get an earful. I mean, how many of these Republicans are going to be walking 4th of July parades and getting yelled at by people on the street? Not an optimal situation to be in. And it'll be interesting to see if it doesn't get done. And I'm not suggesting that it's dead today. That's a long period of time between July 4th and Labor Day. And that can be an incredibly painful period of time. Summers are always rough on politicians, and this one looks like it may be the roughest.
And to think that the White House is planning a big road show. They hit the road as soon as this bill has passed, with cabinet members and other surrogates planning to comb the country to tell the story about what was accomplished. You wonder if that will be enough. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino will be back with us. Our political panel has a lot more to talk about, Kailey, with the Supreme Court rulings today. Not specifically on birthright citizenship, but national injunctions, enough to the point where we saw the president celebrating this morning at the White House.
Yeah, with a lengthy news conference. So we'll bring you the analysis from Rick and Jeanne up next on Bloomberg.
121 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. We check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 38 points. NASDAQ up 106 points. The Dow up 493 points. The Russell 2000 Index up 12 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.24%. The 2-year yield at 3.72%. Green across the screen. Consumer spending declined 0.3% in May. That is the most since the start of this year, amid elevated uncertainty around the Trump administration economic policies. Consumer sentiment rose sharply in June to a 4-month high, with the final June sentiment index increasing to 60.7. That's up from 52.2 a month before. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the Trump administration's agenda for trade agreements could be wrapped up by the Labor Day holiday. He notes that the U.S. has already done a deal with the U.K. and reached an accommodation with China and is now working on agreements with 10 major trading partners. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris checking on the markets for us. Thank you so much. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu here in Washington, where we have our eye on all three branches of the United States government today. Obviously, Congress working its way toward maybe passage of the big, beautiful bill at some point, though there is a lot of work that still needs to get done before then. And this July 4th deadline is looking like it may not be such a deadline after all. That's the legislative branch. Then, of course, you have the judicial branch as the Supreme Court closed out its term today by handing down its remaining decisions, including one in particular that was a birthright citizenship case, not deciding that issue, but ruling on nationwide injunctions, effectively limiting the power of judges to block administrative policies on a nationwide level. And that action from the judicial branch inspiring the executive branch to celebrate today, as we saw a long news conference at the White House with President Trump alongside the Attorney General Pam Bondi, Joe, celebrating that ruling.
Yeah, 55 minutes by my count. We brought it to you live here, of course, on Bloomberg. President Trump at the podium thanking the Supreme Court for, in his words, solving his injunction problem. And that's where we start with our political panel. Once again, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are back together, Bloomberg Politics contributors. And Jeanne, this is something that we've talked about more than once here with regard to the check on the executive power. You have frequently called out Congress for not doing its job, and you've been thankful that the courts have been there. What about now?
I think the job is Congress's. The third branch should have some checks, but I actually think this decision is being overread in many ways. Number one, the dire warnings by many on the Democratic side and the liberal side, I think, are overwrought. The issue of these injunctions is something that's come up in the last 20, 40 years. And it's something that has been used more frequently and something that every president has complained about. And Donald Trump is no exception to that. It is a win for presidential power. It is not a win for Donald Trump on birthright citizenship. And I think the most important thing here is it cuts down on shopping for jurisdictions, which will be favorable for you, which I think is a good thing. I also think it is a good thing that the decision from the majority left open that in some areas, these injunctions, universal nationwide injunctions, can be used. And Amy Coney Barrett, I've read the decision really carefully, says that. I wish she had gone on to agree as to under what circumstances. We're going to wait for a lower court ruling on that. But I do think there is a common sense solution here. Number one, these injunctions became too widely used. That is correct. Number two, there are circumstances in which they are constitutional and should be used, and we'll wait for the lower courts to issue the ruling on that. So I don't think this is quite as dire as we are hearing from the left in particular. And it is something the Democrats will use to their advantage if and when they take back the White House. So a win for the presidency, not for Donald Trump, and it is where the power should lie.
Well, whether or not you view it as a win, Jeanne, the president certainly was painting it as one in the news conference. Let's hear a bit from him earlier this afternoon on this decision.
Thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore.
So, Rick, I don't know if you agree with Jeanne on this not giving as much power to the Trump administration to pursue its agenda as maybe the initial read was, but do you expect that the president will still treat it that way all the same, still pursue that actively?
Sure. First of all, I think it does give him quite a bit of power that other presidents have not exerted. They've complained about the same thing that Donald Trump has complained about. You know, one federal judge upsetting an entire national executive decision. Seems a little out of place in the way that the checks and powers are supposed to be applied. But two, there are 250 cases against Donald Trump and his policies. So I think this will unlock a lot of capability. He treats executive orders like decrees. That's kind of unique in the modern presidency. Doesn't necessarily make it wrong, but he considers it basically the effect of law, which is unique to Congress. And so if there's any agency or any group that are more likely to want to rise up now and exert their authority, it should be Congress, because they're the ones who make laws. But at the end of the day, big win for Trump. Other presidents haven't enjoyed this support from the Supreme Court like he has, and this will unlock a lot of ability for him to make these executive decisions, decrees, executive orders on issues that he believes falls in uniquely the executive branch.
Mm-hmm. Jeanne, you talked about forum shopping or court shopping here. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, pointed out in that news briefing that of the 94 federal judicial districts, only 5 of them, which she called liberal districts, held 25 of the 35 nationwide injunctions. What does this mean in terms of what you call a benefit here, the system working better?
She's looking at, a restricted time period. If you go back to, say, the Obama administration or a Democratic administration, the Biden administration, you will see forum shopping on the right. And they, Republicans very keen on going down to this one district in Texas with one judge who's very conservative. This is what this system has invited. And I would just push back a little on the idea that it is only Donald Trump who benefits from this. Donald Trump is not the king. He will serve another 3.5 years. And when he is out, there may be a Republican, there may be a Democrat in. This is about the branches of government, and the power that they have given this branch is for the presidency, not for Donald Trump. And so Republicans have to be very careful here to overread this. Are they going to like it if the next Democrat comes in and says, I'm going to issue an EO taking away all semi-automatic weapons because I read Article 2 in this way? And then that EO goes into effect and they have to fight it in all 94 of these districts. They will now push back on that. But the reality is that there shouldn't be this widespread use of universal or nationwide injunctions, but there should be circumstances, I argue, like birthright citizenship, in which it is used. And I think if you read the decision by the majority carefully, which is why Amy Coney Barrett was chosen to write it and not one of the more conservatives, she says that this may be an area in which it isn't allowed, and she's letting the district courts or the lower courts decide that. So I do think we're in a wait and see period at this point.
Well, we spoke about the birthright citizenship issue specifically, Jeanne, with Dick Durbin, the Democratic senator and the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, who effectively told us it's still going to create chaos and confusion, even if the court didn't actually take a stand on this 14th Amendment-oriented question. Is that also your expectation?
Absolutely. I think in this case, it is a case in which this patchwork is absolutely unconstitutional and should not be used. And that's what I mean. And I know that those activist lawyers out there on the Democratic side are going to work hard to try to make that case to the Supreme Court. You left open exceptions here. This is an exception, and Dick Durbin is absolutely right. You cannot do this to parents and babies and say, when you are going in to deliver, consider applying to a class action lawsuit or challenging the court. So this is a case in which I'm hopeful the moderates on the Supreme Court will join with the liberals in saying it's an exception, and that these district court judges can issue an injunction in these types of cases. But we need to hear that from the Supreme Court.
Do you share that concern, Rick, this patchwork that Senator Dick Durbin described of states when it comes to the 14th Amendment?
I think there's always been a bit of a patchwork response in the federal judiciary. Obviously, all these courts differ in ideology and geography, and you're going to get different rulings. And that's why the appellate business, the appellate structure is there to iron out some of that patchwork. And ultimately, if it's not ironed up, it gets to the Supreme Court. And we've seen action on behalf of the Supreme Court actively since this president got elected to deal with exactly these things. The bad news for us is these things are done on the shadow docket. We rarely get much of an explanation. This is one of the few that have actually come with a written opinion to give us some guidance on the thinking of the Supreme Court. And so at the end of the day, I think your question to Senator Durbin was the right one, which is, doesn't this mean we're going to get a lot more action at the Supreme Court? And it is likely to have a lot of impact with the activities of these cases now all going up to the appellate level and maybe beyond. So, but at the end of the day, the Supreme Court is the final arbiter, and that irons out a lot of the patchwork that exists below them.
Well, and of course, it wasn't just this case that the Supreme Court made it a ruling on today. There were a number of others, including, of course, a case around religious rights and books in classrooms in Maryland that families weren't notified of when it comes to LGBTQ rights. Rick, do you view any of those other cases that the court decided on today as surprising or highly influential in terms of the way in which this country moves forward?
Well, I think with this debate we've had about wokeism in the political sphere now for quite some time and really evolved during the last presidential election, this decision on letting parents opt out, as it relates to some of the content in schools could have a really profound impact and frankly shift a lot of power to parents in the public school system and away from administrators and teachers. So you knew that was going to happen in some shape or form in this administration as it went along. And I think this is the first real dynamic decision by the court that says, parents are going to decide on content. And I think it could have far-reaching impacts, not just on LGBT issues, but also other issues that parents have railed about for some time.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, our political panel on this Friday. Thank you so much for being with us on Balance of Power. And we still have more coming up. We're going to turn back to Capitol Hill in just a moment, where Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, the Democrat, is going to join us. He, of course, Joe, sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I wonder his reaction to the news we just got from President Trump on Iran, a suggestion that over the last few days he was looking at removing sanctions, but not anymore, as he criticizes the words of the Ayatollah.
Iran has to get back into the world order flow, President Trump says. We will explore this with the senator, along with the latest on reconciliation. Kailey, John Thune still doesn't have the votes.
Yeah, and July 4th, not looking like it may happen at this point. This is Bloomberg.
$140 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Stocks nearing all-time highs as the White House touts progress on trade deals. And the latest data show the economy in the U.S. is weathering that tariff stress. We do check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 36 points. NASDAQ up 96 points. The Dow is up 482 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.25%, the 2-year yield at 3.73%. The European Union and the U.S. believe they can reach a trade agreement before the July 9th deadline, when the U.S. is set to impose a 50% tariff on nearly all European Union products, and the EU plans to impose its own countermeasures. The EU is seeking a mutually beneficial deal, but it also is getting ready for any countermeasures in case talks fail. The Federal Reserve's key inflation gauge ran just slightly above expectations in May, clouding the outlook for rate cuts. Consumer spending declined 0.3%, the most since the start of the year, amid elevated uncertainty around the Trump administration's economic policies. The decline in spending was broad-based, coinciding with declining consumer sentiment this year in response to President Trump's unpredictable trade policy. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. We go now back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Watching the developments in the market for us. Meanwhile, we're keeping you apprised of the developments on Capitol Hill as the Senate is still trying to work its way through potentially procedural measures that would set them up for a vote maybe this weekend as they try to pass this one big, beautiful reconciliation bill before what was a July 4th deadline, though President Trump himself at the White House today suggested July 4th is not the end-all, be-all of this legislation. The problem is, of course, that we still have work to do, specifically from the Senate parliamentarians, some reworking of language that the parliamentarian or measures the parliamentarian has suggested do not pass muster in the reconciliation process, and still some deals that need to be made on issues like SALT in particular. It's a lot of work left to do, and we had the chance on Balance of Power on the late edition last night to ask the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, about some of this. Began by asking him specifically about whether the parliamentarian was making this whole effort a whole lot harder.
I think reconciliation has a process, and we all respect the process. So I think they're just going through the way they do things in the Senate, and I think it's going to work out great for the president.
Secretary, it's good to see you. Welcome to Balance of Power once again. Your thoughts on some of the complications that we're hearing about beyond the parliamentarian. We've got the SALT caucus to satisfy. There are still questions about the level of cuts in the president's big, beautiful bill. Timeline is one thing. The final result is another here. When you consider what we just saw there in the East Room, what is there to celebrate today?
Well, I think today was motivational. You know, what we're doing is we're getting everybody together and saying, let's go past this bill, right? There's lots of people, as the president said, there's lots of people who are grandstanders, a few people, they want to make their point. They want to get their moment in the sun, their big moment of fame. But in the end of the day, the Republican Party is behind Donald Trump. They're going to pass this bill. It'll be the largest tax cut in the history of the United States of America. Or imagine if they didn't pass it, it would be the largest tax increase. So who isn't going to back the largest tax cut in the history of America? No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, really delivering on his promises. So I think we're all really excited about what's coming, and it's coming in the next week or two.
Well, when we consider who might not be super eager to vote on this package, Mr. Secretary, the aforementioned SALT caucus that Joe was just referring to is still threatening basically not to support this measure. They found the first offer from the Treasury Department on some kind of compromise unsatisfactory. We understand there will be more meetings happening today, but are you as a New Yorker going to have to get involved in this as well? You know how close to home this issue is for those members.
Sure, but, what's going to happen is these members and the senators, they're talking, they're pounding it out, they're working it out, and I am confident they're going to reach a consensus, and this bill is going to pass. Look, this is hard fought. It's one big, beautiful bill, which means the key word is big. It covers all of the things that the president promised, and that's a huge amount of things to get accomplished. And I think we're feeling positive, and we're feeling optimistic. And sure, is it a lot of work? Oh my gosh, it's a lot of work. Speaker Johnson and Senator Thune are doing a great job, and I think you're going to see this pass. It's hard work, but it's coming our way.
Secretary, I'm really interested in exploring the relationship between the tax bill and tariffs. If you can maybe take us by the hand here. Does the tax bill only work when you have the revenue coming from tariffs? And we're, of course, having this conversation as we walk ever closer to July 9th, the deadline here for the reciprocals. If the bill alters anymore, does the tariff program need to change with it?
Not at all. The tariff program is in the power of the presidency. Right, Congress has given the president the power to work on these tariffs and to set these tariffs. So that's presidential power. So what's really interesting is this big, beautiful bill does not count the $88 billion of tariff revenue we've received. And now we're earning up to $30 billion a month in tariff revenue so far, and as you get to July 9th, that number is only going to go higher. We're going to announce a whole bunch of deals over the next week or so, and then we're just going to send letters out to everybody who's responded to us, put them in the right category, and off we'll go. So there's going to be tens of billions per month, and those not included in the bill. So when they talk about the deficit, when they're talking about the bill, they're only talking about the things that bill touches. The extra $400 or $500 billion a year that the tariffs bring in, the new tariffs bring in, that just doesn't count for the bill. But of course, that cash counts for America.
Part of our exclusive conversation with Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, here on Balance of Power. You read about it this morning in all the tip sheets and the major newspapers for a reason. He made a lot of news. A lot of headlines came out of that, Kailey, including when you asked him about the president's offhand remark about signing a trade deal with China. Turns out they did 2 days earlier. and really remarkable to see the president back on Truth Social right now. We're going to get to, as we mentioned, Senator Jeff Merkley in just a moment with a lot to talk about involving reconciliation. But Kailey, the president has taken to Truth Social to talk about trade with Canada, a very difficult country to trade with, he says, that for years had tariffs on our products. They've just announced, he says, putting a digital services tax on our American technology companies. So we're shutting down talks with Canada 7 days now until we get a response from President Trump.
Yeah, apparently. He says we will let Canada know. In the meantime, though, he says they are hereby terminating all discussions on trade with Canada effective immediately based on this digital services tax that he calls a direct and blatant attack on our country.
They're obviously copying the European Union, he writes, which has done the same thing and is currently under discussion with us. This just hit Truth Social and the terminal. We want to bring this to you as we learn it here, of course, with the president turning once again to trade here following our conversation with the Commerce Secretary. It is our pleasure to bring in the senator from Oregon, Jeff Merkley, the Democrat, who's in the throes of debate right now on Capitol Hill. Kailey, of course, with the big, beautiful bill that we're talking about. Senator, I want to welcome you to Bloomberg TV and radio. Many thanks for being with us here as we try to get a sense of the timeline and what exactly the final version of this Senate bill is going to look like. You're out with a statement today pointing to some of the issues that the parliamentarian has already addressed, that Democrats challenged. There are still many under review, including Trump accounts, as you write, the tax on third-party litigation funders. And I'll ask you about another one, the current baseline accounting method that was used in the House. Is there a possibility here that the current baseline policy does not make the grade with the parliamentarian and this entire bill needs to be recrafted?
Well, Joe and Kailey, very good to be with you. And if we want to start with that, it is the law as written that each provision under reconciliation will be costed out. What does this cost? How does that compare if provision is not in the law? That means it's comparing it to current law. What the proposal from the budget chair has been is, well, as chair of the budget committee, I can basically compare that provision to any imaginary alternative that I want. That's called current policy. And what they're basically saying is, look, if we extend a tax provision, we can pretend it would have been extended anyway, even if we hadn't put it into the law, and therefore it costs nothing. And this is doing two things. This is creating a huge attack on a couple of the pillars of fiscal responsibility. One of those pillars is that there will be no deficits created by reconciliation bill after a 10-year period. By creating this imaginary comparison, then they can say, well, if it doesn't cost anything, we're not creating deficits beyond 10 years when they clearly are. The second is the foundation for fiscal responsibility in 1974 was all 100 senators agreeing they'd quit using smoke and mirrors, and they would use estimates from the Congressional Budget Office on programs, from the tax committee, Joint Tax Committee on revenues, and we'd quit lying to ourselves and lying to the American people. But this artificial magic math baseline also blows that up. So you're talking a bill that has some $3+ trillion additional debt.
Well, so does the parliamentarian kick it out then?
Well, so the question is, in the Senate process, how will that be addressed? We would like the parliamentarian to rule on this. We think the law is very clear that addresses how you cost out provisions, but decisions in the Senate can also be decided by a vote of the body and attempt to bypass the parliamentarian. That's what the Republicans did on the Congressional Review Act when they said, hey, it was written to apply to rules, but, I think a waiver sounds like a rule. And so they bypassed the ruling of the parliamentarian. We are doing everything we can to say we want to prevent that from happening, but we're also not the majority. So I hope that we can defend the integrity of the process, but not guaranteed.
Well, Senator, as we consider votes in your chamber, knowing you have a seat on the Foreign Relations Committee, we are expecting a vote tonight on the War Powers resolution that is being put forward by your colleague, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. Do you expect the votes will be there for that? Why is this even necessary when the Trump administration has suggested that military action against Iran is over, at least for now?
Well, they've suggested it's over, and then they've suggested, well, maybe it's not over. And so essentially, it is a vote on defending the Constitution. The Constitution says that the president cannot declare war or go to war against another country, that prerogative is restricted to Congress. And the reason for that is the founders said, look, the issues of war are so sizable as they should never be vested with a single person. And think about the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. In that case, well, we lost some 7,000 military members, had 50,000 with serious life-altering conditions, spent $8 trillion on those wars. It's a reminder of how consequential going to war is and why there should be a broader debate than just leaving it to the whim of a single person. So I hope we have the votes. I have a feeling that we might not. There's a lot of intense tribal partisanship that has become stronger and stronger as the media world in America has split into two very separate bubbles of people getting different information. It's really accentuated the partisan divide. So by the principle of the Constitution, we should vote for this tonight, but I wouldn't want to bet that we'll have the votes to pass it.
Well, and another question for you on Iran, Senator. President Trump took to Truth Social earlier this hour to suggest he had been thinking about removing sanctions on Iran, but after a statement from the Ayatollah about winning the war against Israel, he disagreed with. He says that he has immediately dropped all work on sanctions relief. Do you still have hope of a diplomatic ultimate resolution here?
There has to be a diplomatic resolution because otherwise you don't have any idea what has happened to the some 880 pounds of 60% enriched uranium, or how that might be utilized to create 90% or processed to create a path to a nuclear weapon. And so there is a win-win that can come out of this, but it's going to only happen through a diplomatic agreement. And in fact, the Trump administration had folks who were carrying on that conversation before Israel attacked Iran and during the time that the attacks were going on. And it's you can't ultimately resolve this challenge and other challenges. The use of Iran of ballistic missiles that could carry a warhead, the funding of militias throughout an arc that stretches over to Lebanon. Those issues have to be resolved through diplomacy.
All right, Senator, we appreciate your time. Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon here with us on Balance of Power. Thank you so much. And do want to reiterate some breaking news the president brought us just moments ago. He is officially, effective immediately, ending all trade talks with Canada over a digital services tax. We are seeing a market impact, the dollar strengthening against the Canadian dollar, stocks paring back gains of just 0.3% now on the S&P 500. Coverage of that will continue later on the late edition of Balance of Power. So we'll see you then on Bloomberg TV and radio.